everyone, welcome back to Actual English. I'm Jennifer Clyde. It's time for lesson 251 and today's topic is driver's license. Do you have a driver's license? Some of you may, some of you may not. Maybe you're planning on, going to get a driver's license by, passing a test. There are many different tests you have to take in order to, of course, get a driver's license. It's not as easy as you might think. Well, I got my driver's license when I was 16 years old. It wasn't exactly a driver's license. It was more of a permit where you have to have an adult who has a driver's license, I believe, with you in the car when you drive. Very much like a chaperone. And then once you become 18, I believe you can get a driver's license where you can drive your car or anyone's car on your own. The system is quite different in Korea. The age is different as well. I believe that in Korea you need to be 19 years of age in order to get a driver's license. Anyhow, let's talk about today's topic in today's Actual Talk. Let's begin.
Do you drive in Korea?
I do occasionally. It's a little bit intimidating driving in the city. I'm used to driving in big, wide roads, not many cars.
Right, America.
Well, not all of America's like that, but where I'm from is. How about you?
Yes, I do. Actually, I also ride my motorcycle.
Okay.
And I had to take a different test, for a driving license and a riding license. They were different.
Motorcycle certification.
Yes.
Okay.
But actually, I found it quite easy here compared to back home.
Yeah, what's the process back home?
Well, it's quite complicated, actually. There are all these different levels you can take, and most people fail. I think that the fail rate is really, really high.
Okay.
I think it's well over 70%.
I don't know anyone who really failed but in America, where I'm from, but I know there are quite a few levels. You start preparing to get your driver's license 6 to 12 months before you actually are eligible.
Yeah. I mean, I think the British sort of test and also the licensing procedure is pretty good. I think when I took it, I wasn't so nice about it because it is really difficult.
Okay.
And most people expect that you fail. Whereas in Korea, if you fail, you're really considered as a terrible, terrible driver.
Right.
So it's interesting how it's quite different. I found the procedure here, sort of the paperwork and everything was really easy. So it was really simple to do.
How old do you have to be to drive in Korea?
I'm not sure. Is it 19 or something?
I think
like
it's
that?
19. That's what I heard, but is it based on the lunar New Year, when that age, the Korean age, or is it the actual date of birth?
I think it's the birth age.
Okay.
Yes, in that respect.
Interesting. It's 16 in America, a little bit younger.
Yeah, it's the land of the free.
Today we had Eugene and Mary helping us out with the conversation, Actual Talk. Of course, these two were talking about getting their driver's license. Of course, there are many different names for these tests. There's something called a road skills test, also driving test, a riding test, a written test, or a knowledge test. Many different names. But the point is, the test itself is not as easy, but once you get a driver's license, hey, well, good for you. You can drive your own car. So let's check out the conversation between these two line by line. Here we go. First of all, Eugene says, do you drive in Korea? Do you drive a car in Korea? Do you own a car? Do you drive around in Korea? Well, Mary says, I do occasionally. Meaning what? From time to time. Maybe not always. Maybe not on a daily basis. Okay, but she does drive from time to time, sometimes, not always. It's a little bit intimidating driving in the city. She's talking about how it's intimidating to drive a car in the city. She's talking about, for example, Seoul because she resides in Seoul. But let's take a look at this word here, intimidating. What does that mean? intimidating. It's the feeling that you get, a frightening feeling, for example, and also at the same time, you lose confidence. So you're frightened to do something and you also lose confidence. So that is what she is talking about. It is a little bit intimidating driving in the city, or it is a little bit intimidating to drive in the city. She's saying that it's kind of frightening and at the same time, she does not have much confidence driving in the city. She says, I'm used to driving in or on big, wide roads. Here, used to means what? We're not talking about how she once did something and she doesn't do it anymore. We're talking about how she is familiar with something, okay? She's become comfortable with something. She's used to driving in or on wide roads, big and wide roads. Not all of America is like that, but where I'm from, where she is from, it is. And then she asks, how about you? So the question is directed to Eugene, and this time she's asking, how about you? The you is stressed. She's asking Eugene the same question. Do you drive in Korea? He says, yes, I do. Actually, I also ride my motorcycle. So he's also got a motorbike or a bike, motorcycle. And he says, and I had to take a different test for a driving license or a driver's license and a riding license. They were different. So I don't own a motorcycle and, well, this may be a British expression, but, this is my guess. A driving license or a driver's license could be a license that you need to get to drive any kind of vehicle. It could be a motorbike or just a car. But a riding license, I believe, this is specifically for motorbikes or motorcycles, okay? But he's saying that they were different. She says like a motorcycle certification. Okay, she's perhaps talking about the riding license. Now, Eugene says, yes, but I actually found it quite easy here compared to back home. So back home and here, Korea, that's right. So he's saying, well, I actually found it quite easy here compared to back home to get a license. Now, Mary says, what's the process back home? Back home is what? In your home country, okay? So what's the process in the UK? He says, well, it's quite complicated actually. There are all these different levels you can take. So perhaps he's talking about different levels of exams or rather tests that you can take. And most people fail. They do not pass. Fail is the opposite of pass. So if you fail a test, it means you have to take it over again. Okay, you do not end up with a license. He says, I think the fail rate is really, really high. I think it's well over 70%. So he's talking about how it is in the UK, right? They were making a comparison, Korea and the UK, back home. So he's saying back home in the UK, okay, the fail rate is really, really high. What is a fail rate? A fail rate is a number of failures or number of people that fail to pass a test. Okay, he's talking about a given rate. So it's very high, meaning a lot of people, many, many people fail to pass the test. And he says, I think it's well over 70%. What is well over? Way over you've heard of, right? Over the limit, much more than, okay, well over 70%. Wow. So out of 10 people, he's saying that 7 or 8 people fail to pass the test. That's amazing. It must be very complicated and difficult. Now, Mary says, I don't know anyone who really failed in America, where I'm from, but I know there are quite a few levels. So I guess there are several levels in the US as well. She says, you start preparing to get your driver's license. So you start preparing. you start getting ready to take the test. How early? 6 to 12 months before you actually are eligible. That's another one of our vocab words. Eligible basically means that you are qualified, okay? You are able to, legally qualified to do something. So in this case, she's saying that once you are, for example, 16 or 18, you are legally eligible to take the driver's license test. So she's saying usually people, they start preparing. They start getting ready. Perhaps they start driving or practice driving. They study for the written exam or written test 6 to 12 months before actually being eligible to take the test. Now, Eugene says, yeah, I think the British test and also the licensing procedure is pretty good. It's not bad, he's saying. I think when I took it, it was really difficult. And most people expect that you fail. Okay, let's take a look at this here. It's a very long sentence. So far up until this point, he's talking about the system or the procedure in the UK. So he says the British test and also the licensing procedure is pretty good, meaning it's not that bad. It's not that difficult, okay? I think when I took it, when he took the test, it was really difficult though. The test itself was difficult, or it was difficult to pass. That's why a lot of people fail. And most people expect that you fail. They expect that you fail, meaning it's almost natural for people to fail because it's considered a very difficult exam. So, since 8 or 9 out of 10 people fail, he's saying, well, people naturally expect you to fail. So it's no surprise. Hey, did you pass it? And if your friend says, no, I failed, oh, okay. No big deal, okay? But, whereas in Korea, okay, he's making a comparison. If you fail, you're really considered as a terrible, terrible driver. See the difference? In Korea, it's very different. He says, in Korea, if you fail to pass the test, people think of you as a very terrible driver, okay? You are considered a terrible, terrible driver. So it's very different. In the UK, since it's very difficult, people expect you to fail. It's okay to fail. But in Korea, it's very different. If you fail the test, people will be like, you failed? So it's a big, big problem. Here we go. So it's interesting how it's quite different. I found that the procedure here, meaning in Korea, sort of the paperwork and everything was really easy. So it was really simple to do. So he's talking about how everything is done quite simply and easily in Korea. The paperwork and everything, meaning everything that needs to be done or prepared for the driving test. Paperwork is what? We're talking about filing things, such as documents, keeping records of things, okay? So you may have to fill in a form. You may have to take in a few documents for things. So that's all paperwork. We'll go over that later on again. So Mary says, how old do you have to be to drive in Korea? How old do you have to be? So what is the legal age, she's asking? He says, I'm not sure. Is it 19 or something like that? Now he says, is it? And he ends it as a question. So he's not quite sure. He says, is it 19 or something like that? And Mary says, I think it's 19. I believe it is 19. Yes, that's right. That's what I heard. It's 16 in America, a little bit younger. Actually, much younger. 16, 19, that's 3 years different. So yes, in the States, you have to be 16 to get a driver's permit or, be able to take the driving test. But in Korea, you have to wait 3 more years to take the driving test. Anyhow, Eugene says, yep, or yeah, it's the land of the free. Land of the free? Well, of course, we're talking about America, and we're talking about freedom, just being free to do things and how wonderful it is to do things freely. Okay, let's take a listen to the conversation one more time.
Do you drive in Korea?
I do occasionally. It's a little bit intimidating driving in the city. I'm used to driving in big, wide roads, not many cars.
Right, America.
Well, not all of America's like that, but where I'm from is. How about you?
Yes, I do. Actually, I also ride my motorcycle.
Okay.
And I had to take a different test, a driving license and a riding license. They were
like
different.
Motorcycle certification.
Yes.
Okay.
But actually, I found it quite easy here compared to back home.
Yeah, what's the process back home?
Well, it's quite complicated, actually. There are all these different levels you can take, and most people fail. I think that the fail rate is really, really high.
Okay.
I think it's well over 70%.
I don't know anyone who really failed, but in America, where I'm from, but I know there are quite a few levels. You start preparing to get your driver's license 6 to 12 months before you actually are eligible.
Yeah, I mean, I think the British sort of test and also the licensing procedure is pretty good. I think when I took it, I wasn't so nice about it because it is really difficult.
Okay.
And most people expect that you fail. Whereas in Korea, if you fail, you're really considered as a terrible, terrible driver.
Right.
So it's interesting how it's quite different. I found the procedure here, sort of the paperwork and everything was really easy. So it was really simple to do.
How old do you have to be to drive in Korea?
I'm not sure. Is it 19 or something?
I think
like
it's
that?
19. That's what I heard, but is it based on the lunar New Year, when that age, the Korean age, or is it the actual date of birth?
I think it's the birth age.
Okay.
Yes, in that respect.
Interesting. It's 16 in America, a little bit younger.
Yeah, it's the land of the free.
It's now time for our next segment, actual expressions. Okay, are you ready? Let's take you in. We've got the word intimidating, comes from the word to intimidate, which means to kind of frighten somebody to do what you want them to do. So you could intimidate someone to go somewhere. You could intimidate someone to do something. You're kind of forcing them to do what you want them to do by kind of frightening them, okay, or making them feel a bit uncomfortable. But if you say that something is intimidating in the adjective form, you're saying that it is discouraging, terrifying in a way, and in most cases, if you find something intimidating, you lose confidence. Mary was talking about how it's a little bit intimidating for her to drive in the city, which means she's kind of afraid to drive in the city, and at the same time, she does not have that much confidence while driving in the city. Okay, so that's intimidating. What about eligible? Stress goes right there on the first syllable, eligible. Eligible. You're legally qualified to do something. So qualified or even fit. This also means that you are qualified, so meeting the requirements as to participate, compete, or even to work at a certain company, you need to be eligible or qualified. Moving on to paperwork. It's easy to pronounce. Paperwork. Paperwork. We're talking about filing, even administration, anything that has to do with, completing forms. Writing reports, keeping records, filling in blanks on forms. That is all doing paperwork, okay? Okay, now let's move on to our first pattern for today. There was fail or failure rate. In today's actual talk, Eugene mentioned something about how the fail rate is what? It's quite high, meaning a lot of people tend to fail. So you can say fail rate or failure rate as well. Here is a sentence. The written test fail rate is pretty high. This is what I felt. I don't know what it's like these days, but when I took the driving test in Korea, this was many, many years ago. Actually, I aced it. I think I only got about 2 of the questions wrong, but Studying for it or preparing for the written test was actually a lot of fun. I had a book or a booklet that I studied for about a week, but I walked out knowing that I had passed the written test, but I looked around and a lot of people had actually failed. They did not pass the written test. So if that's the case, you can say the written test fail rate is pretty high, meaning a lot of people failed the test. Okay, here we go. Well over. This is also something that Eugene said, how there's well over 70% of the people that actually take the test fail the test, right? So well over means much more than, way over the limit. So here is a sentence. I failed the road test. Why? Because I drove well over the speed limit. Here we go. So road test, we've got well over, and speed limit. Just pay attention to these three. So what happened? I failed the road test. I was out on the road driving the car, but what happened? I failed. Why? Because I drove well over the speed limit. Well over is much more than, way over. So if the speed limit was 60 kilometers per hour, if you drove at 80 kilometers or 100 kilometers per hour, you were driving well over the speed limit. Okay, and here we go, one more sample. Well over, 60% of test takers are in their 20s to 30s. So we're saying more than, much more than 60% of test takers, people that take the test, are in their 20s to 30s. Okay, everyone, now you have an idea? Okay, practice some more on your own.